Welcome to Dare, the show for innovators, entrepreneurs, and startup leaders who dare to shape the future. Your hosts today are Ned Hayes and Cecilia Mariani. Dare is brought to you by Darwaf, the superpower tech team that can make your vision a reality. The Dare podcast is really happy to welcome Mike Campbell to the show today. Mike has a long and storied history in operational excellence and has managed entrepreneurial innovation within operations for companies like Home Depot, Wendy's, ACI, Sterling, Racetrack, and now he's at Clayton Homes. And all of these are companies that needed some innovation brought to them. And Mike has brought operational excellence there and has really inculcated a culture of excellence. So really happy to have Mike with us today. Well, just as a first question, can you tell us what your current role is at Clayton Homes?
Yep. I've got my 2-year anniversary coming up with Clayton Homes. My responsibilities are really running the infrastructure organization, and it's somewhat traditional in terms of service desk, desktop services, network engineering, infrastructure engineering, database team. There's a program management discipline to it. And there's also a series of responsibilities at a leadership level in order to push initiatives inside of the organization. A good example of that is Clayton recognized that they needed to further mature their BCP chops. So I've been assisting the organization in progressing that practice. Plus, Clayton is a very people-centered culture. There's a lot of internal work that we're doing on simply focusing on developing people, which I love. So tons of stuff going on. Very happy to be there.
Right. So one thing that's really interesting about this conversation is that most of the podcasts that we do focus on people who are startup founders or are doing things that are frankly kind of sexy in front of the scenes, strategy, innovation, fundraising, all of that. And we often don't think of the people who are kind of making the ship run, working on the engines, being interesting. And that's why I thought it would be interesting to turn the lens to you, because I've seen you bring operational excellence. And often those are kind of the people below decks, people who are doing customer service, people who are doing operations, people who are keeping the ship running. So can you tell us how you approach those kinds of roles with passion and excellence?
Yeah, I've never quite thought about it that way, but it is true. And, there's sort of a lot of flip sayings that you could put out there. But there's a number of things that I think about when I think about very quietly, everything just working perfectly like a clock.
Right. It's a good day when nothing goes wrong. And there were a lot of people ensuring nothing goes wrong, right?
Yeah. And I've spent actually quite a bit of time pondering the idea about why some companies are significantly more stable than others and breaking that down and understanding what goes into that. And it's not, what I've come to realize, any one specific thing, but there are a series of things that tend to make some companies more successful in terms of running stable operations. I think back to the time that I was at a company called ACI Worldwide for about 4.5 years in the payments business and the credit card business. And our transaction rates were in the thousands of different systems. We were the card processor for a lot of brands that you would recognize, such as McDonald's or Macy's or Tractor Supply, or the list goes on and on. And they expect 100% uptime.
Right.
And so you have to be able to run systems with a level of operational discipline so you don't have outages. And as we all know, stuff breaks.
Right.
But you have to build systems in such a way so that they don't impact when somebody steps up to the counter at a store or anywhere that's processing transactions. And it comes down to a series of things related to how you express change on the environment. If you want to talk about not being very sexy, change management is not sexy, but it's absolutely required if you want to operate at scale in a stable manner with operational discipline. having a meter on what change, when is changing, how are you changing it, can you back it out, all of the stuff that we've learned over the years in doing this stuff. I also start to think about things like, again, not sexy, monitoring and alerting in terms of transparently understanding what your environment is doing.
Hmm.
I was having a conversation with somebody about this just the other day, and we were essentially having a discussion about scaling. And this does go back to your comment about sort of startup culture and people trying to build things successfully. You could consider those to be small companies. And when you think about how do small companies become big companies, and the
Hmm.
reality is they figure stuff out. And what I mean by that is you sort of get to these series of hurdles. And if you don't overcome those hurdles with necessary process, and that can be sort of a dirty word for some people, particularly in small companies. The reason they like
Process.
small
Planning.
companies,
Yeah.
yeah, they don't like to be inhibited and they like to run really fast. But I would suggest that running fast can sometimes be mutually exclusive to running in a stable manner and
Right.
understanding where that line is in terms of implementing process for where it makes sense for what you're actually trying to achieve. And I think over time, for a lot of people that are involved in startups, their priorities change in terms of, whether it's selling widgets or generating revenue or having an impact on the market, where things like stability, performance, those kinds of things start to become more of a priority. And that's where guys like I can help, where that's what I focus on most of my time.
Right, right, absolutely. I mean, when you're a startup, getting to your first $1 million annual run rate is a big deal. But few people talk about the next step of getting to 100 million. And you fit that gap in between, the first few $1 million up to 100 million because you've run systems that can process, $100 million in revenue and can do it without a hitch, without going down. I mean, if you're going to McDonald's or now Dutch Brothers or Amazon, as you said, having that scalable 100% uptime is absolutely essential to keep that engine going.
Yep, it is. And I learned from some very talented people at ACI how those systems were run, how they were set up, the benefits of things like global load balancing, the benefits of things like sophisticated database technologies where you have two copies of the same database that are, 1,000 miles apart.
Mm-hmm.
And if you drop even one or two transactions going to one side, it automatically flips over to the other side and nobody knows. Well,
Right.
it's written in logs, but nobody feels the impact of it, which is the important part. These types of systems are really, really expensive to run and actually not necessary in most cases. I have to tell myself that one of the businesses that Clayton has is a very successful mortgage business. We provide mortgages to both our manufactured home side and our stick built side.
Mm-hmm.
And our transaction rate is not thousands of transactions a second. It's maybe hundreds of transactions a day on a good day. And
Mm-hmm.
so we need to build systems that are stable, but I don't need that type of structure that I would in the credit card business. And having an understanding of where you're putting your resources based on what the requirements are of your given business, I think is also important. Not everybody needs what ACI is providing, and that's
Right.
okay.
Yeah, but speaking of, you were also responsible while you were there for building a complete data center in Ireland, correct? And so I guess if you could walk us through briefly what that process was like, because a lot of companies who listen to this may not be building a data center now, but down the road they may need to. So what does it take to build a data center from scratch?
Yeah, it was me and a large team of other people that were doing it. It was interesting in a number of ways because it was not in the US. It was just outside of Limerick in Ireland on the western side of Ireland. For a number of compliance reasons, ACI needed to have a data center presence in the European space. And so they said, put up a data center and put it right there. So I made a number of trips, I don't remember how many actually, over in order to keep things moving, making sure that things were occurring in the right ways. We made some large mistakes along the way that we managed to recover from. We picked a fairly cutting edge network technology that was not ready for prime time. We had to flip in a series of weeks back to a more traditional networking technology, which made it quite stressful, but we got through it with the help of some very talented people and some flexibility on the part of some vendors.
Right.
It was an interesting experience for me, just in terms of the scale with which we were operating, and a lot of the work that I had been doing for a number of years in terms of data center technologies all came together, in terms of being able to express it on that environment. It was fun.
Right.
I think at a lot of levels, you've really got to enjoy this stuff. And, my father said to me many years ago that, you don't really work a day in your life if you're actually enjoying what you're doing, because it's fun and you want to get into it and you want to get up early and you want to get started. So that was a
Right.
good
Right. It's
example of something that
play.
was fun.
It's play, so to speak. Right.
Yeah.
It's
Yep.
playful.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, your career has also tracked the outsourcing of call centers. So, back, 40 years ago, if you called customer service, you were calling somebody probably in the same geography where you were. And today, that's not
Yep.
necessarily the case for a lot of companies. So, how did that
hmm
change happen? And what does it mean for us now, especially in the age of AI? I guess that's a lot of questions in one, right? So, I was just going to reframe that in terms of where was the call center, let's say, 40 years ago, and then where has that gone, and then what's the future of the call center?
Yep. Yeah, I can speak to that. 40 years ago, it was down the street, around the corner, maybe in a neighboring suburb, and provided steady jobs for a lot of people in this country. And due to a whole number of economic reasons, this functionality moved to other places where, I think if we're blunt about it, you could largely get the same functionality for a much lower labor rate. When I was at Sterling's a very large player in the background check business. Ned, you're sort of familiar with it. When I arrived at that business, they had gone into outsourcing their call center functionality whole hog. They had a very, very large facility in Thane, which is a suburb of Mumbai. They also had a large facility in the Philippines. The Philippines was interesting. I did a couple of trips there and got to learn and understand why the Philippines is unique based on the history and the history of its relationship with the US, and why the call center industry has flourished in the Philippines. And it actually, interestingly, has a lot to do with a well-developed education system and a lack of accent. And their time zone fit quite well, and that was actually a really sharp move for Sterling. The one in Thane was a really, really interesting operation. Some very talented people. Business is done a little bit different in India, of which I sort of in some ways had to push back on a lot of, particularly the leadership practices. And when people started understanding my style and how I operate, they gravitated to it very, very quickly in terms of empowering people in order to be successful. So the Indian staff that worked for me very much gravitated towards that very, very quickly. There's a number of challenges with operating those sorts of environments. I can remember at the data center in Thane, Sterling had data residency rules where in the background check business, we deal with a lot of very, very sensitive information that can't leave the country. So we had to come up with some fairly innovative technology solutions in order so that we could have a call center in Thane that was working with US data. We had a very, very large Citrix environment there that we were running. I had experience with that from my days at Home Depot. So I knew how Citrix was supposed to run. And it actually worked quite effectively over very latent connections. The latency we would see would be 200 to 250 milliseconds, and we actually got it to work really well. The last part of your question was, where is this going in the age of AI? I think I'd be kidding if I knew exactly what the answer was to that, but I think the capabilities that we're starting to see coming out now will only get more and more amazing. So I think what you see now in terms of bots on websites answering sort of simple to moderately complicated questions will only go further and further in terms of wow factor, functionality, and amazing. And I think 10 years from now, a lot of what we speak to a person to do will be done, via a computer. If I'm a betting man, I think that's probably not far from the truth. So a lot of those outsourced call centers doing that functionality, I think, will simply vanish. And a follow-on thought to that might be, isn't that kind of sad? Those people are going to be without employment. And I read a thing online that I thought sort of put it into perspective for me, where this has been going on for hundreds or thousands of years. And the example that sort of brought it to the focus for me was the tractor. When the tractor came into, agriculture, it put a whole ton of people out of work because tractors don't need brakes. You keep them fueled up and maintained, and they can do incredible amounts of work. And it put a lot of people out of jobs. And what did those people do? Oh, they went and found other jobs. And it's a very 500,000 foot view, but there's a lot of reality to people will cycle through and find something else to do. And people in some cases need to be pushed to do those things. But AI is just another version of the tractor, if you sort of go with that analogy. And I think it will do incredible things.
Right, right. It's funny you should mention AI in the context of tractors and horses, because there's a discussion online now about the law of the horse in the American West as kind of an untamed entity that can change the landscape, and people trying to apply those same sorts of laws to kind of unbounded AI. So it's an interesting discussion. It's also a pivot point in our culture and our technology. And you're right, replacement or job changes have been going on for thousands of years. Yeah, so I'd love to switch gears a little bit. You're based in the Atlanta area, and you've been there for,
Mhm.
as far as I can tell, most of your career. What's Atlanta like from a tech perspective and from a innovation perspective? What's the Atlanta region all about in a nutshell?
Yeah, there's multiple ways to answer that question. Atlanta's a very large place, but I've heard it said over and over, and I say it too. But it's a small IT community where maintaining a good reputation is important. And I think just like a lot of other places, but there's a broad base of technology stuff going on here. There's quite a number of very, very large organizations in order to have options to go and work for. I think part of one of the reasons around that is Atlanta's really easy to travel out of. Atlanta's got a lot of there's the main downtown area, but there's sort of little satellite hubs around the city that have grown up. There very much is an innovation culture going on. There's innovation centers down in the city in order to, drive. I think there's several incubators down there in order to drive, people to help start up companies. And there's several quite successful examples out there. I think MailChimp is one of them that started out of there. I've got another friend of mine that's involved in an incubator here in Peachtree Corners that's helped a lot of small companies in order to take their first steps by doing things like renting out office space, which I think is really interesting as well. I like Atlanta. I like all the vibe here. I like the people here. I'm big into cycling, so it's quite close to excellent cycling just north of the city. It's we've enjoyed living here. We've been here since '99, so we're coming up on 25 years. It seems sort of inconsequential, but weather is actually really good here, which has sort of been on people's minds the last few days because it's been cold. But I've enjoyed living in Atlanta, and I think it's a great place for a technology person to be for the reasons that I mentioned. But maybe another one is simply scale. There's a lot of opportunity here, and I've had opportunities to go other places and been resistant to that simply because I don't necessarily want to leave the opportunities that are here, now and in the future.
Right. And you've seen companies there really, really scale up over time as well. I mean, the Atlanta Tech Hub has really grown over the past, 20 years or so, right?
Yes, Home Depot is probably a good example. It's gone through a lot of different phases, but it's a really, really large player here. But there's lots and lots of other ones too that have moved to Atlanta, I think through some state government incentives, but just for other reasons in terms of talent. One of the struggles that we have at Clayton and we've sort of had to change our mindset a little bit, is, we would prefer people come into the office, but we have a very flexible remote policy.
Hmm.
But simply when we're battling other companies for talent, we have to go further and further now in order to try to find things like network engineers. It can be really hard to find good network engineers,
Hmm.
good security people. It's tough to find talented people. And if you demand that they show up to the office every day, it's going to be even really much, much harder. So
Right.
we source people out of Florida and, all sorts of different places.
Right. And I've actually read studies that companies that do embrace work from home and actually support employees doing that consistently rather than just like, well, if you want to do that on Friday, it's fine, but you have to be like, if you aren't doing that grudgingly, but you're actually doing it consistently as part of the culture, productivity has actually gone up for
Mm.
people. So has that been your experience as well?
Yeah, it has. I think leaders need to very much change their style in terms of how they're supporting people. And I sort of use that word carefully because I think sort of traditional leadership styles from the past where I want to have my eye on you. I want to verify that you're sitting at a desk actually doing something.
Hmm.
And I sort of think that that's very passé. I think people want flexibility in their lives. And for someone that wants to push a servant-based style and enable people, I think getting balance in their lives is really, really important. And I don't know how many times I've said this to people, but if you want to go to your kid's ball game at 3 o'clock, go.
Yeah.
And if you need to plug in after the kids go to bed, do that. If you need to get up early the next morning to catch up on that work, do that. You're in charge of your schedule, not me.
Yeah.
If we set clear expectations with people about what we need to get done and who our customer is and making sure that they're taken care of, I would actually rather that you go to your kid's game at 3 o'clock because you're going to be happier about the fact that you're feeling better, that that you're being more successful as a parent. And taking that perspective that people need to have balance in their lives ends up, what's that thing about a rising tide floats all ships?
Yes.
And happy people, tend to be more productive people. And if you're putting them under a weight of traditional leadership styles that end up crushing people's motivation, I don't think that's a very happy place for anybody.
Right, absolutely. And the family is definitely going to be more supportive if you're able to balance that out as well. They're going to be like, "Hey, dad has to get on the computer at 9 p.m. to finish that customer ask from India." Family's going to be like, "Great, fantastic," because dad was there at the ball game, right? Dad or mom. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I think that flexibility, a lot of people, particularly talented people, are demanding that these days. And I notice in the press, and I'm sure you do too, Ned, about, XYZ company is demanding people come back to the office. And I sort of just wonder, what is it that they're trying to do? What goal are they trying to achieve here? It's certainly not making people happy. And I think that sort of bellwether moment, you know, that we all went through when COVID hit, sort of put us on a new course in terms of what people wanted. We got a taste for something at that point, and it's become a significant requirement for people now.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I've seen people be really successful in remote distributed teams as long as they have the infrastructure and the tools that can make people successful. If you're just requiring people to call in on a phone call, it's not going to be as good as, having a complete, Slack system or Microsoft Teams or other tools that people can use to really, really collaborate asynchronously with colleagues. That's key. There are so many more tools than there were, even 10 or 15 years ago to make that collaboration feel really in person almost. Yeah.
There's a really great analysis that I saw that absolutely made sense to me. It's partly role dependent, and it sort of had this axis of place constrained and time constrained.
Right.
And if you're a desktop services person and you work on laptops, you kind of need to be able to touch those laptops. So you have to be able to show up to a place where those laptops are.
Hmm.
Or maybe it's a center, a technology center or something. And you probably need to be there, during normal business hours. So you're sort of time constrained. But if you have the sort of job that requires, you know, maybe spurts of collaboration, but then long periods of individual work, that doesn't require you to be at a place, and it doesn't require you to do that work at a specific time. And so on this axis, you can sort of plot different roles and what those requirements are, and you can sort of start to see what roles really work for different types of work. And that just made a ton of sense to me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'd love to see that chart. Well, I'll ask a question that must be on everybody's mind. I'll just ask it directly, Mike. You aren't from the US, you aren't from Atlanta. So what brought you here and what keeps you here?
Yeah, I
And
came over in the late 80s for school originally, and it seemed like a good idea at the time. I met a good looking lady while I was in college, and we got married soon after I graduated from school, and we made our home here. We're actually sort of coming up to a pretty big decision here shortly. We've got 17-year-old twins, they're juniors in high school. They're dual citizens between the US and New Zealand, and we're
Mhm.
trying to figure out their approach for college. And they have an opportunity to go to college in New Zealand, which has an excellent tertiary education system. If that happens, that sort of may change our trajectory a little bit in terms of where we go. But we haven't made any decisions yet. But what keeps me here is a lot of the things we discussed earlier. I like my job. I like technology. I like to be engaged. I like doing security stuff. It's something we sort of didn't talk about, but I like the sort of the arms race that's going on in terms of protecting organizations. That stuff's fun. I enjoy doing those things. And at some point in the not too distant future, I think I sort of will want to change how I work. What I mean by that is I do want more control of my time. My daughter and I were having a discussion about what she wants to do in her career. And she's very interested in becoming a teacher. And I said, there's some pros and cons about being a teacher, but one of them is that you do get longer breaks than other, type jobs. One of my goals is to do the bike ride across America. I want to do the one from San Diego to Savannah, but you need about 35 days to do that.
Yeah.
And it's hard for me to go to my boss and say, "Hey, I'm going to be gone for a little bit over a month. You're cool with that, right?" That's a pretty unusual request. But if you're a
Right.
teacher, you get that sort of time, which I think is sort of interesting to think about. But I sort of want to change my routines at some point, 4 or 5 years from now, where I sort of go down to not exactly working 40 hours a week, or maybe it's a 3 month job here, and then I'm off for 3 months to go do some things that I want to do, and then maybe come back for another gig and use all the experience and capabilities that I've acquired over the last 35 years in order to allow me to slow down a little bit and have more flexibility with my time. That's sort of what I'm
Right.
angling towards.
Right. That's another thing that we're seeing in the job world. People are more comfortable not doing that 40-hour, 60-hour a week job and job sharing or time shifting their work so that they can have a life. And this is also part of the kind of millennial generation of what they expect out of work. They expect work to be part of their life, not their entire life.
Yeah. Yeah. I was reading an article on the weekend that was talking about living in Portugal.
Hmm.
I'd really like to try that sometime, but you've got to be able to have the flexibility with whatever you're doing in order to be able to sort of go and have those experiences. And, I want to do that stuff while I still can.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'll ask our closing question here. What do you dare to dream, Mike? What future do you imagine you're creating?
It actually comes back to that last statement. What I'm trying to create is an environment where I have flexibility to do the things that I want to do, leverage all the experience that I've got. I think one of the things that surprises me a little at times is sort of the statement that you sort of don't know what you know.
Hmm.
And what I mean by that is if you said to me, "Hey, Mike, what do you know about business continuity planning? At first, when I think about that, my mind goes a little bit blank, and then I sort of start thinking about all the things that I know about BCP, and it's a lot of stuff. Or
Yeah.
what do you know about building data centers? Well, actually, I know quite a bit. Or what do you know about, running highly redundant applications? Well, I know quite a bit about that. What do you know about leadership? Well, I've been doing that for a while. And what you come to realize is you've learned a lot of stuff over a long period of time, that you get to the point where helping other companies or other people solve problems because they haven't had those experiences becomes something that you can actually do fairly well. And I want to create a space where I can go and help others solve the problems that they're experiencing, because I might have done it 25 years ago or 15 years ago, and I can help them get over those hurdles a lot more quickly just based on the fact that I happen to have jumped that one several years ago. And I think that's kind of fun. I like to help people, I like to have an impact, but then I also like to go home and do the stuff that I want to do too. So
Right.
getting that balance, I think, is kind of what I want to build for the future.
Fantastic. Well, I really appreciate the conversation, Mike, and thanks for the time.
It was great to catch up with you, Ned. If you're in town, give me a call and we can get together again over a beverage, maybe.
Sounds good. Okay. Well, take care, Mike.
Sounds great. Take care, Ned. Bye.
Bye. Thanks to our guests today for their great insights on DARE, the podcast for innovators, entrepreneurs, and startup leaders. If you'd like your story to be featured on DARE, just contact us at info@darwaft.com. DARE is brought to you by Darwaft, the tech team that can make your vision a reality.